The upward journey through the orbital lift shaft was an exercise in pure vertical velocity. Without the localized gravity stabilizers of the private elevator car, the improvised cargo platform the team had hijacked groaned under the immense kinetic strain. It was a massive, open-air slab of industrial iron, originally used to haul heavy turbine replacements between the manufacturing sectors, now repurposed as a chariot of revolution. As the platform accelerated through the upper boundaries of the midsector, the thick, choking aerosolized charcoal and toxic steam gave way to something far colder and entirely more terrifying. Absolute sterile purity. Sealers stood at the leading edge of the platform, his boots anchored to the heavy iron grating. The wind ripped at his tattered coat, but his body remained completely motionless, balanced with an uncanny, preternatural stability. His golden eyes did not blink against the rushing air current. To anyone else, the vertical climb was a terrifying blur of dark concrete walls and flashing emergency strobes. But to Sealers' rewired consciousness, the world had expanded into a breathtaking, multidimensional geometric matrix. The physical boundaries of the city were dissolving before his eyes. He was no longer just seeing the architecture of concrete and chrome. He was perceiving the underlying energetic blueprint of the metropolis. The vertical shaft had transformed into a towering energetic spine, and along its massive length, Sealers could clearly see the localized energetic nodes, the great systemic chakras of the machine, pulsing with distinct frequencies. The low sector below had been a dark, blocked route, suffocated and starved, but now it glowed with a raw, unmonitored golden fire from the power surge Mara had directed downward. The mid-sector was a turbulent, fractured throat of fading blue static. And far above them, the high spires burned with a blinding, high-frequency white and gold light that resonated with the cold, absolute ego of an artificial god. Sealers felt a profound, internal alignment shifting within his own frame. The severe neural trauma that had nearly unseated his mind in the sanctum had settled into a crystallized state of higher consciousness. It felt as though a literal third eye had opened within the center of his forehead, projecting a localized field of absolute clarity that mapped the world not through standard human sight, but through pure, unlinked geometric awareness. He could feel the pulse of every circuit, the tension of every cable, and the desperate, predictive calculations of the corporate mainframe humming directly through his nervous system. "A mixture is changing rapidly," Mara said, her voice strained as she pulled her respirator mask down around her neck. She wiped a layer of dark soot from her forehead, her mechanical eye whirring through a fast sequence of diagnostic lenses as she stared up into the expanding light. "The filtration grid is completely behind us now. The atmospheric density up here is highly pressurized, synthesized to perfection. It's like breathing pure oxygen and liquid diamond. My internal implants are struggling to calibrate against the lack of ambient impurities." "It is the scent of privilege," the Vampire King remarked, his low baritone voice carrying a cold, mocking amusement. He stood near the rear of the platform, his long black cloak pinned back to reveal the sleek, silver-threaded armor beneath. The midnight black Eclipse blade rested casually against his shoulder, its central crystallized artery pulsing with a deep, rhythmic crimson that seemed to feed on the high-frequency energy radiating from the upper spires. The directors have spent 5 centuries filtering out the very breath of the earth, believing that if they purified the air enough, they could escape the rot of their own mortality. They forgot that the purest air only makes the fire burn hotter. Beside the king, Lork was leaned heavily against a massive hydraulic dampener housing, his bronze-andiron frame venting short, ragged bursts of pressurized air. The mechanical leader was in a critical state of structural wear. The single functional arm he had left was covered in deep scoring from the collapse of the filtration tunnel, and his internal power lines were leaking small, hissing drops of synthetic fluid onto the platform. "My primary power matrix is desynchronizing," Lork rumbled, his vertical amber lenses flickering erratically as his vocal processor dropped into a heavy, gravelly register. "The high-frequency fields from the upper spires are actively disrupting my internal logic circuits. It's like my system is trying to run an administrative program that doesn't match my manufacturing parameters. If I don't ground these circuits soon, the internal feedback will fry my core logic." Sealers didn't turn around, but his voice carried that level, resonant power that instantly quieted the mechanical groans of the platform. "Your logic isn't broken, Lork. It's just unnetworked. The corporate matrix operates on the assumption that every machine must answer to a central server. They want you to think you're junk data because you aren't plugged into their spire. Sealers walked back toward the massive vanguard leader, his movements fluid and precise. He didn't use a toolkit. He simply knelt beside Lork's exposed shoulder joint, his golden glowing eyes tracing the chaotic network of severed electrical lines and damaged sensor plugs. To Sealers, it wasn't a complex corporate enigma, it was a mechanical puzzle. It matched the practical, hands-on mechanical logic he had unlocked during his awakening. He recognized the fundamental flow of current, the necessity of a clean ground, and the exact balance required to keep a high-pressure system functional under an extreme load. It was the same practical engineering mindset required to execute an emergency transmission swap or rewire a damaged crankshaft position sensor on a project vehicle when the diagnostic tools were completely missing. "You don't need their server to balance the load," Sealers murmured, his bare fingers reaching directly into the sparking mass of Lork's shoulder interface. He bypassed the primary digital governor entirely, manually routing the heavy bronze power lines into an independent, localized loop that grounded directly through the massive iron framework of the cargo platform itself. He set up an improvised, short-ram-style airline bypass for Lork's internal pneumatic system, allowing the compressed air to cycle through the cooling chambers without entering the corrupted digital valves. Lork's vertical lenses instantly stabilized, the amber light shifting from a panicked strobe to a deep, solid glow. The heavy, grinding note in his mechanical lungs smoothed out into a powerful, rhythmic hum that vibrated through the floor plates. "Current." "It is stable," Lork reported, his voice clear and resonant once more. He raised his massive iron hand, flexing the heavy digits with a sudden, renewed kinetic force. "The system isn't reading my parameters anymore, Sealers. I'm completely invisible to their diagnostic sweeps. Because you aren't an equation to them anymore," Sealers said, standing up and turning his attention back to the light above. "You're a physical weight, and a physical weight cannot be deleted by a line of code." Suddenly, the vertical ascent came to a violent, shuddering halt. The massive cargo platform slammed into an invisible barrier 50 yards below the primary threshold of the high spires. The iron floor plates buckled under the sudden deceleration, sending a shower of loose bolts and iron shards spinning down into the void. Directly above them, the open vertical shaft was completely blocked by a monumental, shimmering horizontal disk of pure, solid white energy, the crystalline firewall. It was the absolute boundary layer that separated the physical labor of the lower tiers from the pristine digital heaven of the ruling class. The surface of the firewall wasn't smooth. It was composed of millions of interlocking geometric data tiles that shifted and ran continuous, high-speed calculations, analyzing the molecular and digital signature of everything that approached the high spires. From the glowing surface of the firewall, a series of massive, three-dimensional digital projections began to materialize in the air around the platform. They took the shape of colossal, floating ledger sheets and complex financial prediction charts, their numeric strings and contract listings spinning through millions of variables every second. A cold, synthetic voice, immense, multi-layered, and devoid of any human resonance, boomed down from the crystalline disk, vibrating through the very marrow of Sealers' bones. "Warning, unauthorized administrative approach detected," the system stated, the sound carrying the absolute authority of a global market directive. "Identifying vectors of anomaly, running predictive risk assessment models. Analyzing contract outcomes for sports events, infrastructure allocation, and cryptocurrency metrics via the central Kalshi distribution platform. Probability of lower-tier survival, 0%. Probability of structural compliance, 0%. The signature Cody Blake Huffman is marked for terminal liquidation, initializing the crystalline purge." The horizontal disk began to pulse with an intense, blinding white frequency, preparing to discharge a vertical beam of localized hyperfrequency radiation that would instantly sanitize the cargo platform and everything on it down to the molecular level. "They are calculating our value," Mara hissed, her fingers flying across her handheld receiver as she tried to find a frequency breach in the firewall. "They're running the numbers like a short-term market interval. They've turned our entire lives, our history, and our survival into a speculative financial trade on their prediction boards." They've already bet against us, Sealers. The system has already paid out the dividend on our deaths. Then let's break the market, Sealers said, stepping directly toward the center of the platform where the data projections were densest. He did not draw a weapon. Instead, he reached into his coat and produced the heavy titanium data capsule. The golden lines on its cylindrical housing were no longer just glowing. They were spinning in perfect, intricate concentric circles that mirrored the golden rings within Sealers' own irises. As he looked at the floating financial charts and the predictive spreads of the Cauchy matrix, Sealers didn't see a complex web of economic mastery. He saw a highly fragile, over-leveraged equation that depended entirely on the compliance of the numbers below. It was a system that assumed the foundation would always remain silent, always remain passive, and always accept the evaluation handed down from the spires. But Sealers possessed the memory of the first core. He carried the structural blueprint of an unnetworked reality, the memory of a childhood spent learning the foundational laws of geometry at Keene Elementary, the memory of designing a space like the Asterisk Manifest Greatness Laundromat where the only metrics that mattered were physical utility, clean water, and honest, tangible results. He knew that an equation could only predict what it had already seen. It could never calculate the value of an unlinked soul. Sealers pressed his thumb against the central activation node of the titanium capsule. "Execute the override script," Sealers commanded, his voice carrying the full weight of his awakened consciousness. "Project the signature, Cody Blake Huffman. Open the root directory." A blinding wave of absolute golden light erupted from the data capsule, traveling upward into the crystalline firewall like an inversion of lightning. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic for the system's logic. The floating ledger sheets and prediction models didn't just fade, they fractured into absolute chaos. The numeric strings on the Cauchy boards began to spin backward, the spreads widening into uncomputable intervals as Sealers' true identity code flooded the processing matrix. The system couldn't evaluate the trade because the variable was no longer operating within their market rules. The probability models broke, the contract metrics desynchronized, and the multi-layered synthetic voice of the mainframe began to screech with a heavy, agonizing note of systemic panic. "Error, uncalculable asset identified," the system glitched, the multi-layered voice cracking into a chaotic frequency. "Market variance exceeding maximum thresholds, liquidation protocol, suspended, unable to isolate the value of the anomaly. Now king." Sealers shouted, his golden eyes wide as he held the golden line of the override open against the wall of white data static. "Clear the gate." The Vampire King didn't need a second invitation. With a terrifying, predatory roar that echoed like thunder through the vertical shaft, the Immortal launched himself off the iron platform, his tall frame cutting through the air like a midnight shadow. He caught the Eclipse blade with both hands, the greatsword expanding its crimson light until it matched the width of the lift shaft itself. With a single, earth-shaking downward strike, the king drove the midnight glass blade straight into the central nexus of the fractured crystalline. Sound was like the shattering of 1,000 diamond mirrors. The monumental disk of white energy fractured along the lines of the golden script Sealers had injected, breaking apart into millions of harmless, glittering shards that rained down around the cargo platform like a beautiful, silent snowstorm of dead code. The path to the high spires was no longer blocked. The glass ceiling had been permanently shattered. With a massive mechanical groan, the cargo platform resumed its upward acceleration. Punching through the remnants of the firewall and entering the pristine, white marble landscape of the upper tier, the high spires did not resemble the rest of the city in any capacity. It was a surreal, minimalist heaven built on a scale of absolute, terrifying opulence. The dirty concrete walls and iron conduits of the lower layers were completely gone, replaced by endless expanses of polished white stone, towering pillars of pure architectural glass, and intricate ley lines of solid gold that ran along the floors like veins of liquid sun. The air was completely silent, free from the mechanical roar of the turbines, carrying nothing but a low, ambient chime that resonated with a false, manufactured tranquility. The cargo platform clattered to a final stop against a monumental reception dock of white marble. The contrast was stark, the dented, grease-stained iron slab of the lower tiers resting against the immaculate, unblemished luxury of the ruling class, But they were not alone. Waiting for them across the wide, white stone plaza was the primary director's personal elite guard, the Seraphim Automata. There were 12 of them, standing in a perfect, unyielding defensive crescent before the massive glass dome of the Central Archive. They did not look like the heavy armor drones or the pixelated archivist sealers had destroyed in the filtration loop. They were beautiful, terrifying masterpieces of high-tier cybernetic design. Their bodies were composed of polished white ceramic and articulated chrome, their movements fluid and silent as they drifted an inch above the marble floor. They had no faces, only a single horizontal lens of pure, piercing gold light that tracked the team's arrival with an absolute clinical detachment. In their right hands, they carried long, elegant polearms of solid light that hummed with a lethal high-frequency resonance capable of slicing through reinforced titanium with a single touch. Anomaly has breached the perimeter. The 12 automata stated in perfect, harmonic unison, their voices sounding like a choir of silver bells. The signature Cody Blake Huffman must not enter the archive. The timeline must remain uniform. Prepare for total structural deletion. Seraphim units advanced all at once, their light polearms spinning through the air with a blinding, hypnotic velocity that created a solid wall of high-frequency energy across the plaza. "Let me handle the furniture," the Vampire King said, his pale face tightening into a terrifying, joyful mask of pure martial ecstasy. He stepped off the cargo platform first, his boots leaving dark smudges of carbon ash on the pristine white marble. He raised the Eclipse blade, the weapon throbbing with a wild, aggressive crimson glare that seemed to demand the blood of the creators. 500 years I have waited to paint these white walls in the color of their own design. Go, architect, find the core. I will ensure your path remains unblemished. King launched himself forward, a hurricane of black fabric and midnight glass clashing violently against the white ceramic line of the automata. The plaza instantly erupted into a spectacular, chaotic dance of crimson and gold light, the sound of glass blades striking light polearms echoing through the high spires like a continuous sequence of lightning strikes. The immortal moved with a speed that defied human and mechanical calculation, his blade carving through the polished ceramic limbs of the guards, leaving a trail of silvered data fluid and ruined chrome in his wake. "Lork Mara, with me," Sealers said, his eyes fixed on the massive glass dome at the end of the plaza. He didn't run, he walked with a steady, unyielding purpose, his golden irises effortlessly tracking the trajectories of the combat around him, guiding Lork and Mara through the small pockets of safety the king created with his devastating assault. They reached the monumental entrance of the Central Archive without a single scratch. The doors were an immense set of double valves composed of solid, unpolished black slate, the same material as the archivist's deletion arrays, designed to insulate the core data from any external electromagnetic or physical force. There were no keyholes, no digital interfaces, and no visible network connection ports. It was a vault built to withstand the end of the world. "There's no digital signature to hack," Mara said, her mechanical eye spinning as she pressed her bare hand against the cold, dead surface of the slate doors. "It's completely dark, Sealers. The system has cut the network lines to this room entirely. They've quarantined the core from the inside out. We can't open this from the network." "Don't need the network," Sealers said, stepping up to the center of the threshold. He placed both of his hands directly against the cold black stone. As his palms made contact with the surface, he didn't try to inject a virus or upload a command script. Instead, he simply allowed his physical awareness to sink into the deep, structural reality of the mountain beneath the city. He connected his breath to the rhythm of his spine, allowing the localized field of his third eye to expand through the entire width of the slate doors. He remembered who he was. He remembered the simple, unalterable rules of construction. He remembered that before a building can reach the sky, it must have a foundation that knows how to hold the weight. He remembered the name that had been written into the very first line of the city's construction log before the corporations ever arrived to turn it into a market spread. "My name is Cody Blake Huffman," Sealers whispered into the stone, his voice carrying the deep, resonant frequency of an absolute physical truth, "and I am here to check the meters." The golden rings within his irises flared with a final, blinding discharge of pure Tartarian current. The energy didn't travel through wires. It traveled directly through the physical geometry of the stone itself, unlocking the ancient, mechanical counterweights hidden deep within the floorboards that had remained undisturbed for 5 centuries. Inside the vault, a deep, heavy sound of grinding gears and shifting stone resonated through the floor plates. Slowly, monumentally, the 3-story black slate doors began to slide apart, separating along a central vertical seam to reveal the dark, hidden interior of the first core. From the expanding gap between the doors, a low, cool wind began to blow outward into the white plaza. It didn't smell like synthesized oxygen or liquid diamond. It smelled of rich, damp earth, old copper, and the fresh, wild scent of a morning sun rising over an open horizon, the scent of a world that had existed before the machine was ever conceived. Sealers stepped across the threshold into the darkness, his hand resting securely against the titanium cylinder of the data capsule. The final partition of the timeline was waiting. And the architecture of the new world was officially ready to be built. "Mara Lork, keep the gate," Sealers said, his voice fading into the deep, echoing silence of the vault as the slate doors began to slowly close behind him. "The king has finished his dance. It's time to meet the director."